Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I made a presentation at a Deloitte function. I called it A View of the World, and we've uploaded it onto YouTube, so if you have a chance to have a look at it. I went through a number of things, and particularly the oil price, where I was saying this is one of the new risks in 2014. I certainly expected more traction on the rapprochement between Rouhani and Barack Obama to have reduced the oil price by this time. But clearly, when I was thinking about that, I did not forecast the spillover of ISIS and the virulence of its insurgency. And I think, in my opinion now, oil could just simply go anywhere up. My home thoughts turn back to Hafez, who I haven't read for a while. Your love should never be offered to the mouth of a stranger, only to someone who has the valor and daring to cut pieces of their soul off with a knife, then weave them into a blanket to protect you. And I like this. Why not become the one who lives with the full moon in each eye that is always saying, with that sweet moon language, what every other eye in this world is dying to hear. Put up a photograph of Hannah on her birthday. Then I like this photograph of Brazilian supporters watching a live screening in Porto Seguro during a World Cup match between Brazil and Mexico. And I liked this photograph of Brazil at night, which was sent out by Gotham 3. Political reflections. Iraq is China's fifth largest overseas oil supplier, behind top producer Saudi Arabia, which last year provided 19% of China's 5.6 million barrels a day, as well as Angola, Oman and Russia. Last year, CNPC produced 299 million barrels from Iraq, almost one-third of its overseas output. Meanwhile, Chinese state enterprises, refiner Sinopec and offshore player CNOOC have both made big investments in Iraq's oil industry. CNPC is now operating 4 projects in the as yet untouched southern part of the country, making it the single biggest foreign investor in Iraq. Last year, CNPC produced 299 million barrels from Iraq, almost one-third of its overseas input. And my conclusions are that, in the Pivot to Asia document, they speak of distant blockade operations, and it's an important component of the pivot. And I think the Chinese would do well to consider alternative supplies. Half-price Kurdish oil threatens Iraq breakup with Turkish help. A tanker containing 1 million barrels of crude oil is floating around the Mediterranean, and its cargo is available at half price. Yet if any country seizes the bargain, it may be pushing Iraq closer to disintegration. The oil aboard the tanker is at the center of a fight over its ownership between the semi-autonomous region of Kurdistan, which pumped and shipped the crude from its territory in northern Iraq, and the central government in Baghdad, which claims the rights to all oil revenue. Kurdish Peshmerga armed forces seized on the anarchy in northern Iraq, where militant Islamists routed the Baghdad government's army last week, to occupy the region's key oil hub, Kirkuk. The oil dispute has raised the possibility of the Kurdish region achieving financial self-sufficiency, to go with those expanding territorial ambitions. If that tanker docks, Iraq's Kurdistan regional government will take an important step toward independence and hasten the breakup of Iraq, said Nihat Ali Oskan, an analyst at the Economic Policy Research Foundation in Ankara. And this goes back to that Oded-Yinon plan, which seems so prescient, which is basically saying that the Middle East was in danger of fragmentation into tiny little pieces. BD Live has an editorial about Africa's terrorism burden, and I was this morning a guest at a seminar being hosted by Amina Mohammed, the Foreign Secretary, and by the Foreign Minister of Israel, Avigdor Lieberman, and of course Homeland Security was front and center of the Israeli offering. The attack on Nairobi's Westgate Mall earlier this year came as a complete surprise to everyone, including Kenya's security services. Its sheer brutality gave Kenyans and the rest of the continent a wake-up call, but seems not to have produced the vigilance required to prevent such an attack from recurring. Nigeria soon followed. Hundreds of schoolgirls were kidnapped by Boko Haram, the wantonly violent rebel group that has terrorized northern Nigeria. Nigeria's security services have proven incapable of preventing further bombings and shootings, so the situation has escalated further, with more loss of life. In recent days, Al-Shabaab, the same group of Somali ruthless murderers that carried out the Westgate attack, struck again, this time in the town of Mekitoni. They killed 53 people in an attack that lasted for 4 hours. On Monday, they struck yet again, murdering at least 15 people in Poromoko village. Kenya is now the scene of an unfolding bloodbath whose end may be in the distant future. Apart from the sanctity of human life and the inexcusability of using violence to make a political point in democratic states such as Nigeria or Kenya, there are two other reasons why these terrorist attacks needed international response, says the BD Live. The first is that Kenya and Nigeria are key economic hubs on the east and west of a continent that desperately needs rapid economic development. Instability in either country spells disaster for the regions they inhabit. The second is that both countries have been unable to respond with the acumen and force required in the face of terrorist attacks. They essentially are sitting ducks. Having long regarded terrorism as a largely Western problem, the time has now come for the African Union to work with its partners in the West to formulate strategies and provide the resources needed to fight what is becoming a scourge on this continent too. A delayed response would mean more lives lost and further damage to Africa's development. As much as some African countries may have reservations about working with Western security agencies, and Kenya is, I think, the outlier in this regard, the lives of people are worth more than mostly ideological geopolitical squabbles. Like economics, terrorism has become a global phenomenon that demands a global response. I responded, and I quoted again, as much as some African countries may have reservations about working with Western security agencies, the lives of people are worth more than mostly ideological geopolitical squabbles. I could not agree more, given the extreme acceleration and the intensity of both insurgencies, Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. It is clear that the situation is spinning out of control. The immediate and paramount need is to stabilize the situation. African countries would be better advised to be a little Sun Tzu and seek to collaborate with all partners in this multipolar world in order to beat back what is now an outsized threat to the Africa Rising narrative. The Micex, and you remember I called it, and I'm quite pleased about this, is up 21% since its bear market low in March. Trades at 5.4 times estimated 12-month earnings, which is cheap, 15.5 in India, 10.7 in Brazil. Currency markets, the euro has gone higher, it's at 135.91, dollar index has slipped to 80.38, dollar yen 101.92, Swissy 0.8962, the pound, I believe, and I haven't double checked it, it's back above 170 or was traded above there. I think it could run up sharply to 173.50. Aussie 0.9405, back over 94, India rupee back below 60 at 59.925, South Korean won below 10.20 at 10.18.45, so the high beta currencies quarter bid, Rial 222.26, Egyptian pound 7.15 and 11. And the South African rand, which had become terribly oversold, was rebounded to 10.67.50. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and as you can see from this, and it's really symptomatic of how it's played out over a number of months, it's been stuck in quite a narrow trading range. Euro dollar 135.91. Incredible resilience, actually, and it's really admirable. Sterling, about which I got bullish on the 12th of August 2013 when I said I think you need to be net long sterling. I'll put up a 1-year chart. I think it's headed to 173.50, and as you can see, we're at multi-year highs. Gold got a bit of a bounce, 1277.49, but I think you sell the rallies. crude oil around the 106 level, and I think the spike risk is sky high. And an official quoted by Reuters said the militants now control 75% of the Baiji refinery, which is 210 kilometers north of Baghdad. Coming to Africa, the World Bank has forecast that the Mozambique economy will grow by 8.1% this year and by up to 8.6% in 2015. This is the director of Global Macroeconomic Trends team, Andrew Burns, said on Tuesday in Maputo. And I wrote about Maputo and Mozambique on the 3rd of June when I said Mozambique could be the next Qatar, and I was referring to the gas. I talked briefly about the precocity of the Indian Ocean as a zone of long-range navigation and cultural exchange is one of the glaring facts of history made possible by the reversible escalator of the monsoon wind. That's from Professor Felipe Fernandez Amesto, who's a very brilliant writer in point of fact. Today it is self-evident that Mozambique sits on gas reserves which will, if the execution is optimal, an optimal execution around our natural resources is a sine qua non of the Africa Rising narrative. In my opinion, transform Mozambique into the next Qatar. I'll put up that photograph I like that I took of the early evening as I looked out to the Indian Ocean. And bear in mind that the actual end point for that reversible escalator monsoon wind was Maputo in that area. And you'd wait there and then you'd come all the way back. I'll put up that photo of the evening and another one of the conference I attended, which was was called Africa Rising. And in the tweet I put, as I took a photograph of the poster, it's not rising the same uniform, floating all boats type rise we had in 2012 and 2013, but it is rising, but it's never going to be linear. The South African All Share slipped a little yesterday. It's up 9.4755% this year. South Africa's inflation rate climbed to 6.6% in May, which is the highest in almost 5 years. Dollar rand, that's better at 10.6753, and I still think we are more likely to get to 10 than 11, although we went pretty close to 11 recently. The Egyptian pound is at 7.15, and the Egyptian stock market rebounded 0.51% yesterday. It's up 24.432% this year. The Nigerian All Share is down 0.3822%. And then I found this story on Yahoo. Why should anyone be thinking in negative fashion? Tell them we will not do it. Those rumouring coups must be living elsewhere and not in Nigeria, said the Chief of Defence Staff, Alex Bade. And I'm not sure who he is. Air Chief Marshal Bade dismissed talk of a military takeover in a statement issued by Nigeria's National Orientation Agency, which promotes government programs across the country. The armed forces are defenders of democracy. We are an arm of democracies. How can an arm of democracy work against the democracy that we are part of? He asked at an event in Abuja. Expressed surprise at the coup rumours, but called the military a professional group that has no option but to love Nigeria. The very fact that talk is bubbling under the surface speaks to the uncertainty in Nigeria. Ghana Stock Exchange up 9.743% in 2014, but as I said previously, they're going to be calling on the IMF. Uganda has reserved $8 billion in rail projects for Chinese bidders. This is to extend the railway from Mombasa to Nairobi that the Chinese will be building. Interesting story in The Independent saying there was only one German general in the First World War who managed to occupy British territory. The only one who did, albeit a long way from the Western Front, was Paul Emil von Lettow-Vorbeck, commander of the Germans in their East Africa possessions, Tanganyika, now Tanzania, and present-day Rwanda and Burundi. It was he who led a remarkable guerrilla war against Britain, South African, Nigerian, Gambian, Kenyan, Portuguese, and Belgian forces in the region, managing to score a series of remarkable successes and remaining at large when the armistice arrived in 1918. Alone among Germany's overseas possessions, Deutsche Ostafrika never surrendered. Indeed, Lettow-Vorbeck would have a special clause in the armistice of November 1918, specifically devoted to the arrangements for the safe conduct of himself and his men at the end of the war. At the outbreak of war, Lettow-Vorbeck had been commander of a small garrison in Tanganyika, which came under British attack at Tanga in November 1914. He denied the British victory on that occasion and continued to do so through brilliant guerrilla tactics for the rest of the war. Seems like an interesting story. In fact, I think Basanji was looking into that in some shape or form when he was pottering around Tanga. Kenya, Pan-Continental Oil and Gas has verified that the recently completed BG-operated Sunbird 1 well off the southern Kenyan coast has intersected an oil column. The first ever oil discovered off the East African coast, according to the joint venture partners. The Sunbird 1 oil is the historic first ever oil discovery offshore Kenya, said Rushworth. Furthermore, it is the only offshore oil column ever reported seaward off the eastern coastal margin of the African continent, from South Africa to the northwest tip of Somalia. We believe that this is a play-opening discovery in Kenya's Lamu Basin. Because of the Sunbird discovery, we expect to see a significant increase in industry interest offshore Kenya. We encountered a thick and effective seal over the top of the reef, which was an initial risk for us, and the regional follow-on implications of this are truly significant. Porosity, permeability, and seal for the reservoir were all better than Pan-Continental expected. Now that we know there is a prospective oil system in the Lamu Basin, and we know the important technical details, we're in a prime position to explore for larger volumes of oil over our very extensive portfolio of prospects and leads. Pan-Continental's blocks offshore Kenya all contain Miocene reefs as well as numerous other types of geological targets. The Sunbird oil discovery has allowed us to geochemically type the oil source rocks, allowing the joint venture to effectively plan the way ahead for further oil exploration. And I wrote about this in April 2012 when I called my piece Hunting Elephants in East Africa. And I said Kenya was like a freshly minted debutante at a coming out ball. And on that note, I'll put up those photographs of the elephants and the Amboseli, 1st of September 23rd, and look at the backside of this one. It's so enormous, and then the elephants crossing the Galana River and the Sava, and it's a terrible story about that elephant being killed. It's just outrageous. And then I subsequently wrote on the 4th of June, which was the last time I visited Maputo, that I believe the eastern seaboard of Africa is clearly the last great energy prize in the 21st century. And that I said then the lake of hydrocarbons stretches from Mozambique up through Tanzania, Kenya, and Somalia. And I think this latest news is evidence of that. Shabab again claim Kenya attacks urge Muslim uprising. Somalia's Shabab rebels on Wednesday repeated claims they were responsible for 2 consecutive massacres in Kenya, the day after Kenya's president insisted that local political networks and not the Al-Qaeda-linked group were to blame. The attack in Peketoni was ordered by the Mujahideen High Command to retaliate for Kenya's killing of Muslims in Somalia and Kenya. The Islamic fighters answered to that holy call. This is Shabab's military spokesman Abdul Aziz Abu Musab in a news conference broadcast by Shabab's radio. According to the spokesman, the Shabab attackers controlled the area of the battle zone for 10 hours after entering on Sunday night before withdrawing. He also said 20 people were killed in an attack the following night in a nearby village. Although Kenyan officials say 9 people were killed. Fighting against our enemies in Kenya will continue, the spokesman added. We are calling on the Muslims in Kenya to fight for their dignity, as there is no neutral middle ground now. Your religious leaders were killed, your daughters were raped, your property was looted, he said. Use guns, knives, and all weapons you can get. Fight individually, he added. And obviously they're contradicting the president's claim around this attack. These comments of his were broadcast by the pro-Al-Shabaab radio Al-Andalus, but couldn't be very independently verified, but most security officers will tell you that is seen as very strong affirmation because that is their radio channel. The president's spokesman says, we have our intelligence and we know what our intelligence says, and we're not going to go into mudslinging with Al-Shabaab. Well, it's full of downside trade, isn't it? Because they're going to keep saying they did it. And at one point they said, this is the first time anyone has denied we've done something that we have accepted we did. Kenya shilling is firm at 87.60, and I think will firm a little bit more. That's on the potential inflows via the Eurobond. Nairobi All Share firmed 0.12% yesterday. It's up 9.052% in 2014. It was on a losing run, and actually on Monday I told Duncan I don't see it falling away, falling out of bed. I think it's actually quite oversold, and we saw a little rebound yesterday, and let's see if it gains a little bit of strength. NSE 20 is down 2.7608% in 2014, bounced yesterday off a September 2013 low, bounced 0.55%. Equity Bank closed yesterday at an all-time high of 44.25 and is plus 43.902% in 2014. That's all about the MVNO license, about which they were holding an investor briefing earlier today, but I was otherwise disposed. I went to listen to Lieberman and Amina. Kenya Airways has rebounded 10.909% this week from a very oversold position. I think it's still got further to go. And if you haven't watched that video I did with Captain Koki Matungi, the first female African pilot of a Boeing Dreamliner, you must. And the link is at the bottom of the page on Rich Wrap-Ups. Once again, thank you so much for stopping by.